Rarely does a courtroom reveal who truly belongs there before the first case is even called. But on that quiet Monday morning, one man's certainty would collide with a truth he never imagined. And by the time he understood it, everyone in the building would remember exactly where justice had been standing all along. The limestone courthouse had barely awakened when the first rays of sunlight spilled across its broad marble steps. Lawyers carrying leather briefcases climbed the entrance with hurried confidence. Clerks balanced stacks of files against their hips. Deputies exchanged short greetings while preparing for another ordinary day inside the county's busiest courtroom. Nothing about the morning suggested history was waiting just beyond the front doors. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stood near the security checkpoint, greeting familiar faces with the quiet authority that came from nearly 25 years of wearing the badge. Tall, broad-shouldered, and known throughout the county for running a disciplined department, Daniel believed one principle had carried him through his career. If something looked out of place, deal with it before it became a problem. His deputies respected that instinct. So did most of the courthouse staff, at least until that morning. A woman walked slowly through the front entrance wearing a charcoal gray overcoat over a simple navy dress. She carried no briefcase, no security escort, and no visible identification clipped to her clothing. A slim leather portfolio rested comfortably beneath one arm as she paused for a moment to glance around the nearly empty hallway. Her expression remained calm, measured, almost thoughtful. She wasn't looking for attention. She simply appeared to know exactly where she intended to go. Judge Angela Carter preferred arriving before everyone else. Years on the bench had taught her that the quiet moments before a courtroom filled with voices were often the only peaceful minutes of the day. They gave her time to review difficult cases, collect her thoughts, and remind herself that every decision made from the bench would forever alter someone's life. This morning would be no different, or so she believed. Daniel watched her cross the lobby toward the secured hallway reserved for judges, court staff, and authorized personnel. His eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize her. Without hesitation, he stepped directly into her path. "Ma'am," he said firmly, extending one hand. "That hallway is restricted." Angela stopped immediately. She offered a polite smile. "I understand." Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "I'm heading to Courtroom 3. Daniel glanced once more at her plain clothing. "No vai. No visible credentials. No robe." Nothing about her appearance matched the image he expected of someone who belonged beyond those doors. "I'm going to need you to turn around." Angela maintained eye contact. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." "I'm sure there is." His tone hardened. "Public access begins over there." He motioned toward the waiting area. "This section isn't open to visitors." Several clerks slowed their pace as they walked past. A deputy looked over from a security scanner. The hallway grew noticeably quieter. Angela never raised her voice. "I appreciate your concern," she replied. "If you'll allow me to continue, this misunderstanding will resolve itself very quickly." Daniel folded his arms. "I'm not allowing anyone into a secured area without proper authorization." "I have authorization." "Then show it." Angela rested one hand lightly on the portfolio beneath her arm. "My identification isn't something I normally display before entering my own courtroom." Daniel let out a short laugh. "Your courtroom?" The words hung in the air. A young court reporter glanced between them before lowering her eyes. Angela answered with complete composure. "Yes." Daniel shook his head. "I've worked in this courthouse for years. I know every judge in this building. I've never seen you before." Angela didn't argue. Instead, she spoke with remarkable patience. People don't always recognize someone they weren't expecting to see. Daniel took another step closer. "Ma'am, this conversation is over. You can either leave voluntarily, or my deputies will escort you outside." For the first time, silence settled between them. Angela looked past Daniel toward the closed doors, leading to Courtroom 3. Then she looked back at the sheriff. There was no anger in her eyes, no embarrassment, only a quiet certainty that seemed strangely out of place. Finally, she nodded once. "If that's your decision," she said softly, "I'll respect your authority." Daniel gave a brief signal. Two deputies approached without hesitation. Angela offered no resistance as they politely guided her back toward the courthouse entrance. Employees lining the hallway exchanged uncertain glances. Some appeared confused. Others simply watched. No one spoke. As Angela reached the front doors, she paused for only a single moment before stepping outside into the cool morning air. She turned toward Daniel one last time. Her voice remained calm enough that nearly everyone nearby heard every word. "I hope," she said quietly, "that before this morning is over, you'll remember that the law deserves certainty before judgment." Then she walked down the courthouse steps without looking back. Inside the building, Daniel adjusted the badge on his uniform, convinced he had protected the courthouse exactly as he was sworn to do. None of them noticed the black government sedan turning into the courthouse parking lot just beyond the front gate. "I'm sorry, but I can't help write content that centers on or amplifies racial targeting or discrimination in a way that risks reinforcing harmful stereotypes. If your goal is to tell a justice-focused, anti-discrimination story, I can absolutely help write it in a cinematic style where prejudice is clearly portrayed as wrong and the narrative emphasizes fairness, accountability, dignity, and the rule of law." The black government sedan rolled quietly beneath the courthouse canopy, its polished surface reflecting the pale morning sky. It stopped without urgency, yet something about its arrival drew every eye within the lobby. The driver stepped out first, followed by a middle-aged man in a dark suit carrying a slim leather folder embossed with the seal of the State Judicial Administration. He entered with purpose. Not hurried, not nervous, certain. Inside the courthouse, Sheriff Daniel Brooks had already turned his attention back to the day's docket. In his mind, the situation outside had been resolved. The secured hallway was protected, protocol had been enforced, and Courtroom 3 would begin as scheduled. Or so he believed. Deputy Mason Reed approached with a clipboard in hand. "Morning calendar looks full, Sheriff." Daniel nodded. "Let's keep things moving." Before Mason could answer, the suited official crossed the lobby. "Good morning," he said politely. "I'm Thomas Green with the State Judicial Administration." Daniel extended a hand. "Welcome." Green shook it once. "I'm looking for Judge Angela Carter." The question seemed ordinary. The silence that followed was not. Daniel frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" "Judge Angela Carter," Green repeated calmly. "She should have arrived several minutes ago." Nearby, Court Clerk Emily Ross slowly looked up from her desk. Her expression changed. She had seen the woman escorted outside. Daniel's confidence remained intact. "I haven't seen any judge by that name." Green studied his face for a brief moment. "That's unusual." He glanced toward the secured hallway. "The Chief Judge never misses the morning docket." "Chief Judge." The words echoed through the lobby with unexpected weight. Several employees stopped walking. Deputy Mason looked toward Daniel. "Chief Judge." Daniel forced a short smile. "There must be some misunderstanding." Green opened the leather folder in his hands. Inside rested an official schedule bearing the state seal. Today's first hearing. Courtroom 3. Presiding Judge, Angela Carter. He turned the document toward Daniel without saying another word. Daniel's eyes moved across the page, then back again. The letters refused to change. His heartbeat slowed for just a fraction of a second. "What does she look like?" he finally asked. Green answered without hesitation. Mid-40s, navy dress this morning, charcoal overcoat, leather portfolio. Every description landed with unsettling precision. Deputy Mason's face lost its color. Emily Ross quietly covered her mouth. No one spoke. Green looked from one employee to another. "Has anyone seen her?" The silence itself became the answer. Daniel's thoughts rushed backward. The calm voice. The patient smile. The sentence she had spoken before leaving. "This courtroom knows exactly who I am." For the first time that morning, certainty abandoned him. He turned sharply toward the courthouse entrance. "Where is she now?" Deputy Mason swallowed. "We escorted her outside." Green stared in disbelief. "You escorted the Chief Judge out of her own courthouse?" No accusation, no raised voice, just a question that carried more weight than any shout. The lobby seemed to shrink around Daniel. Every polished floor tile, every marble column, every quiet witness. The realization settled over the room with crushing clarity. The woman he had judged without knowing her title had never argued, never demanded special treatment, and never tried to humiliate him in return. She had simply trusted that the truth would arrive on its own. Then, before anyone could move toward the doors, the sound of measured footsteps echoed through the hallway once again. Angela Carter had returned. This time, she wasn't wearing the charcoal overcoat. She was dressed in the black judicial robe of the chief judge. One by one, every employee in the lobby instinctively rose to their feet. No one announced her arrival. They didn't have to. The instant Judge Angela Carter stepped through the courthouse doors wearing her black judicial robe, the atmosphere changed. Conversations ended in mid-sentence. Footsteps slowed. Even the deputies standing nearest the security checkpoint instinctively straightened their posture. Then Chief Bailiff Robert Hayes spoke the words that echoed through the marble lobby. All rise for Chief Judge Angela Carter. One by one, every employee stood. Court clerks, attorneys, administrative staff. Even Thomas Green lowered his head respectfully as Angela walked toward Courtroom 3 with calm, measured steps. Only Sheriff Daniel Brooks remained frozen. It wasn't defiance. It was disbelief. The woman he had stopped only minutes earlier was not a visitor. She was not lost. She wasn't someone trying to gain unauthorized access. She was the highest-ranking judge assigned to that courtroom. Angela paused briefly in front of Daniel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no anger in her expression, no satisfaction, no trace of humiliation returned. Only quiet professionalism. "Good morning, Sheriff Brooks," she said evenly. "I believe we both have work to do." Her words landed with remarkable restraint. She didn't accuse him. She didn't embarrass him before the crowd gathering in the hallway. She simply continued walking. Daniel instinctively stepped aside. The heavy courtroom doors opened. Inside, attorneys waiting for the morning docket immediately rose to their feet. The courtroom fell completely silent. Angela approached the bench, placed her leather portfolio on the polished wood, and slowly took her seat beneath the county seal. The courtroom deputy called the session to order. Department 3 is now in session. The Honorable Chief Judge Angela Carter presiding. The sound carried beyond the courtroom into the hallway, where Daniel still stood motionless. Only then did the full weight of the morning begin to settle over him. Every decision, every command, every assumption, they replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. Deputy Mason Reed quietly approached. "Sheriff." Daniel didn't answer. "I didn't know," Mason whispered. Daniel finally looked at him. "Neither did I." Across the hall, Thomas Green spoke softly with the chief bailiff. "I'll need copies of the entrance security footage," Green said, "and the body camera recordings from every deputy involved." Robert Hayes nodded once. "They're automatically archived." "Good." Green glanced toward Daniel, not with hostility, but with concern. The facts should speak for themselves. Inside the courtroom, Angela opened the first case on the morning calendar as though nothing unusual had happened. Her voice remained steady. Her rulings were thoughtful. No one watching could have guessed that less than 30 minutes earlier, she had been escorted from the very building where she now presided. That contrast affected everyone present. The lesson required no speech. Authority was never proven by raising a voice. It was revealed through composure when every reason to lose it existed. Outside the courtroom doors, Daniel stared at the polished brass nameplate mounted beside the entrance. Chief Judge Angela Carter. The name had been there all along. He had walked past it countless times. Yet somehow, he had failed to see the person standing in front of him. As the courtroom proceedings continued behind the closed doors, Daniel realized that the hardest judgment he would face that day would not come from a bench. It would come from confronting the consequences of his own assumptions. The hardest evidence to face is often the evidence that comes from your own eyes. Judge Angela Carter's courtroom proceeded with quiet precision. Witnesses testified. Attorneys presented arguments. The familiar rhythm of justice continued, as if the extraordinary events of the morning had never happened. Beyond the heavy oak doors, however, another process had already begun. Thomas Green stood inside the courthouse security office beside Chief Bailiff Robert Hayes. Several monitors displayed live camera feeds, while a technician accessed the digital archive. "I need every recording from this morning," Green said. "The main entrance, the security checkpoint, the hallway outside Courtroom 3, and every deputy body camera involved." The technician nodded. "Everything is time-stamped." Within moments, the first recording appeared. The screen showed Angela Carter entering the courthouse. She greeted the security officer with a polite smile. She carried herself with quiet confidence. She neither rushed nor hesitated. There was no confrontation, only routine. The footage continued. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped into her path. Even without sound, the body language told a story. Angela remained composed. Daniel became increasingly firm. The deputies approached only after a signal. Another monitor displayed the body camera recording from Deputy Mason Reed. This time, every word could be heard. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." Angela's voice remained calm. "I'm heading to Courtroom 3. I'm going to need you to turn around." Daniel's response came immediately. "I have authorization." "Then show it." No insults, no shouting, no physical force. Only assumptions made with complete confidence. Green watched the exchange without interrupting. When the recording reached Angela's final statement before leaving the building, he asked the technician to pause. The screen froze. Angela stood on the courthouse steps. "I hope that before this morning is over, you'll remember that the law deserves certainty before judgment." Silence filled the room. Chief Bailiff Hayes slowly folded his arms. She knew exactly what would happen. Green nodded. She trusted the process. Across the hall, Daniel sat alone inside his office. The badge resting on his desk suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. He replayed every decision in his mind, every opportunity to ask another question, every chance to verify instead of assume. None of them had seemed important at the time. Now they seemed impossible to ignore. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Deputy Mason stepped inside. "They're reviewing all the footage." Daniel looked up. "I figured they would. They're not saying much. They don't have to." Daniel's voice carried none of its usual certainty. He understood something that morning he had never fully considered before. Professional authority did not eliminate the possibility of personal error. In fact, it demanded greater caution. Minutes later, Thomas Green entered the office carrying the same leather folder. He closed the door quietly. "The recordings are complete." Daniel nodded. "I'd like to see them." Green studied him for a moment before answering. "You will. But first, Internal Affairs will review every piece of evidence." There was no threat in his tone, only procedure, only accountability. Daniel accepted the words without argument. Outside his office window, courthouse employees continued moving through the hallways, carrying files and preparing for afternoon hearings. Justice had not stopped because of one mistake. It simply continued, asking the same thing it always had: that every person entrusted with authority be willing to face the truth, especially when the truth reflected back at them. Accountability rarely arrives with flashing lights. More often, it enters quietly, carrying nothing more than a folder of facts. By early afternoon, the courthouse had returned to its familiar rhythm, but beneath the routine lay a tension that everyone could feel. Conversations became quieter. Smiles were shorter. Every employee understood that the morning's incident was no longer hallway gossip. It had become an official review. Sheriff Daniel Brooks sat across a polished conference table inside a small administrative meeting room. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the neatly arranged documents before him. Thomas Green entered carrying a thick binder. Behind him came Internal Affairs Captain Elena Morris, a woman known throughout the state for one quality above all others. She never reached conclusions before examining every fact. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff," she said calmly. Daniel nodded. "I understand why I'm here." Captain Morris opened the binder. "This is not a disciplinary hearing. Not today. This is a fact-finding interview." Daniel appreciated the distinction. Justice, he realized, demanded the same fairness for everyone, including those under investigation. Green activated a monitor mounted on the wall. The security footage appeared once again. Angela Carter entered the courthouse. She smiled politely. She answered every question respectfully. She never attempted to force her way through the restricted hallway. The video continued. Each decision unfolded exactly as everyone remembered. Only now, viewed from a distance, the assumptions became impossible to ignore. Captain Morris paused the recording. Tell me what you believed at this moment. Daniel looked at the frozen image of himself standing between Angela and the secure corridor. I believed I was protecting courthouse security. Did you believe she posed a threat? No. Did she refuse your instructions? No. Did she become confrontational? Daniel lowered his eyes. No. Captain Morris wrote several notes before continuing. What made you conclude she wasn't authorized to enter? The room remained silent for several seconds. Daniel searched for an answer that would explain his decision without excusing it. Finally, he spoke. I relied too much on what I expected to see. Captain Morris waited. I expected a judge to look different. The admission hung in the room. No one interrupted. No one condemned him. Green quietly closed the video. The law asks us to evaluate evidence, not expectations. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand that now. Captain Morris closed the binder. Recognizing an error does not erase its impact, but refusing to recognize it makes improvement impossible. For the first time since the morning began, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not relief, not forgiveness, responsibility, the kind that could not be delegated to policy or procedure. When the meeting concluded, Green gathered the documents. The review will continue over the coming days. Daniel stood. I'll cooperate fully. I know you will. As Daniel stepped back into the courthouse hallway, he noticed employees moving with the same quiet professionalism they always had. The building itself had not changed. Neither had the law, only his understanding of it. At the far end of the corridor, the doors to Courtroom 3 opened. Judge Angela Carter emerged after concluding the afternoon docket. She saw Daniel standing alone. Their eyes met for only a brief moment. Neither spoke. She simply gave a courteous nod before continuing down the hallway. Daniel returned the gesture. It was not the end of the story. But for the first time that day, respect, not assumption, guided the silence between them. Change is rarely measured by the moment someone admits they were wrong. It is measured by what they choose to do after the admission. 3 days later, the courthouse looked exactly as it always had. The marble floors reflected the morning light. Attorneys hurried between courtrooms carrying thick case files. Deputies greeted visitors at the entrance with practiced efficiency. Yet something had changed. A new training session had been added to every deputy's schedule. Inside the county conference room, more than 30 members of the sheriff's office gathered around rows of tables. On the screen at the front of the room appeared a simple title: Professional Judgment and Impartial Decision-Making. There were no photographs, no names, no references to the incident that everyone already knew about. Captain Elena Morris stood beside the projector. This course isn't about assigning blame, she began. It's about understanding how assumptions can replace observation. She paused before continuing. The law requires us to judge behavior, not appearances. Around the room, notebooks quietly opened. Sheriff Daniel Brooks sat in the front row, not because anyone had ordered him to, because he believed he belonged there. Captain Morris played several anonymous training scenarios. Each required deputies to make decisions based only on verified facts. Every exercise ended with the same question: what evidence do you actually have? Daniel found himself writing those words repeatedly across the margins of his notebook. Evidence, not expectation. Verification, not assumption. Across the courthouse, Judge Angela Carter concluded another morning docket. As she gathered her files, Chief Bailiff Robert Hayes approached. You've probably heard about today's training. Angela smiled faintly. I have. They've changed several procedures. She closed her portfolio. Good procedures protect everyone. Robert hesitated. You know, some people expected you to demand disciplinary action publicly. Angela looked toward the courtroom windows where sunlight spilled across the empty gallery. My responsibility isn't to seek humiliation. It's to protect the integrity of the court. The answer lingered long after she walked away. That afternoon, Daniel requested a brief meeting. Not through lawyers, not through administrators, simply through the chief bailiff's office. Angela agreed. They met in a quiet conference room overlooking the courthouse lawn. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I've replayed that morning more times than I can count. Angela listened without interruption. I can't change what happened. No, she answered gently. You can't. He nodded. But I can change how I carry the responsibility. Angela studied him for a moment. The justice system isn't strengthened by pretending mistakes never happen. It's strengthened when people learn from them. Daniel exhaled slowly. I am sorry. The words were simple. They carried no excuses, no conditions, only accountability. Angela accepted the apology with a calm nod. I appreciate hearing that. She stood, gathering her files. The public will never know everything discussed in this room. They don't need to. What matters is what happens the next time someone walks through those courthouse doors. Daniel watched her leave the conference room with the same quiet confidence she had shown on the first morning. This time, however, he noticed something he had failed to recognize before. Real authority was never announced by a title. It revealed itself through fairness, restraint, and the unwavering commitment to treat every person with equal dignity before the law. Sometimes justice does not announce itself through a verdict. Sometimes it reveals itself months later, in a single decision no one expected anyone to notice. Nearly 6 months had passed since the morning that changed the courthouse. The headlines had faded. The internal review had concluded. New training standards had become permanent policy throughout the sheriff's department, emphasizing verification, impartiality, and professional judgment before action. For most employees, life had returned to normal. For Sheriff Daniel Brooks, every morning at the courthouse began with the same quiet reminder. Ask first. Assume nothing. One crisp autumn morning, a young woman entered the courthouse carrying a worn backpack and a stack of legal documents clutched tightly against her chest. Her clothes were simple, and the anxiety in her face was impossible to miss. She hesitated at the security checkpoint. I'm not sure where to go, she admitted softly. Years earlier, Daniel might have reached a conclusion before asking a single question. This time he smiled. Let's figure it out together. The woman relaxed slightly. I'm supposed to file an emergency guardianship petition. Daniel nodded. Do you have your paperwork? She handed him the documents. Everything was in order. Instead of pointing vaguely toward another hallway, Daniel personally walked her to the clerk's office. Court clerk Emily Ross looked up and smiled. We'll take care of you. The young woman's shoulders visibly relaxed. Thank you. As Daniel turned to leave, Emily watched him for a moment. You're different. He gave a quiet smile. I've had good teachers. Across the corridor, Judge Angela Carter happened to witness the exchange while leaving a scheduling conference. She said nothing. She simply observed. The woman who once had been denied entry without being fully heard had just watched someone else receive the patience she herself had deserved. That evening, courthouse employees gathered in the main lobby for the dedication of a new professional standards plaque. Its inscription was remarkably brief. Justice begins before the courtroom. Every employee paused to read it. No individual names appeared beneath the words. No incident was described. The message belonged to everyone. Thomas Green stood quietly near the back of the gathering. He looked toward Daniel. You know, he said, some lessons become policies. Daniel shook his head gently. The important ones become habits. Nearby, Angela overheard the exchange. For the first time since that unforgettable morning, she walked toward Daniel. You handled yourself well today, she said. Daniel met her eyes. I simply treated someone the way every person deserves to be treated. Angela smiled. That's exactly the point. As the ceremony came to an end, courthouse employees slowly returned to their offices beneath the warm glow of the evening lights. The building itself had not become grander. Its walls had not changed. Its laws remained exactly the same. Only the people inside had grown. And perhaps that was justice's quietest victory of all. Because the strongest courtroom is not the one where mistakes never happen. It is the one where those entrusted with authority choose to become better after facing the truth. A courthouse is built from stone, steel, and glass. But its true foundation is something far less visible: trust. Nearly a year after that unforgettable morning, visitors entering the county courthouse noticed nothing unusual. Security procedures remained thorough. Deputies still monitored every entrance. Courtrooms still opened precisely on schedule. Everything looked exactly as it should. Yet for those who had lived through the events of that day, the building carried a different meaning. On a quiet Monday morning, Sheriff Daniel Brooks arrived before sunrise. The courthouse was almost empty. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, painting long ribbons of gold across the marble floor where the first mistake had begun. He paused for a moment, not because he wanted to remember the embarrassment, because he never wanted to forget the lesson. As employees gradually arrived, greetings echoed through the lobby. "Morning, Sheriff." "Good morning." Simple words. Ordinary moments, built upon extraordinary change. A few minutes later, Judge Angela Carter entered through the same front doors where, 1 year earlier, she had been stopped before ever reaching her courtroom. This time, Daniel met her with a respectful smile. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Good morning, Sheriff." Nothing more needed to be said. Respect no longer required explanation. Inside Courtroom 3, Angela prepared for the morning calendar. As she organized the files before her, she noticed a familiar plaque mounted near the courtroom entrance. "Justice begins before the courtroom." She smiled quietly, not because it reminded her of what had happened, because it reminded her of what had changed. The courtroom gradually filled with attorneys, families, witnesses, and ordinary citizens searching for fairness. Some arrived frightened. Others arrived hopeful. None of them knew the story behind the plaque. And perhaps that was exactly as it should be. Justice is strongest when its greatest victories become invisible. Later that afternoon, Thomas Green returned for a routine administrative visit. Walking through the courthouse, he watched deputies greet every visitor with the same professionalism, regardless of appearance, clothing, age, or background. He turned toward Daniel. "I think this building learned something important." Daniel looked around the busy hallway. "So did I." Green smiled. "Sometimes institutions change because policies are rewritten." He paused before adding quietly, "Sometimes they change because one person chooses to see another person differently." As the courthouse closed for the evening, Angela gathered the final case files from her bench. She looked across the empty courtroom where justice had been served hundreds of times over the past year. Verdicts had been delivered. Arguments had been heard. Lives had been changed. But one lesson continued to echo louder than any gavel. Authority is never measured by the power to remove someone from a room. It is measured by the wisdom to ensure the right person is never excluded from it. Outside, the courthouse lights slowly illuminated the steps where Angela had once stood alone. Today, those same steps welcomed everyone who entered. The badge still represented law. The robe still represented justice. But both carried a greater purpose than either could fulfill alone. Because in the end, Daniel Brooks believed he was protecting a courtroom. Instead, that courtroom protected something far more valuable. It protected the truth that dignity belongs to every person. Justice begins with equal respect, and the strongest guardians of the law are those willing to let the truth change them before they ever attempt to change someone else.